Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard and this is Lap of the World. If you've been following the channel for the last month or so, you will have seen our misadventure with what's become my favorite topic on the NSX recently, and that was the failure of an axle boot on the driver's side that cost us a little bit of extra stress and consternation on our way out to NS Expo in Oregon. Now, we ended up swapping the entire axle in the Motel parking lot. That video I'll link below. And that got us home and got us through the track event and the rest of the 8,300 miles that we ended up driving on that circuit of the western United States is what it ended up being. Now that I'm back in the shop though, it's time to address the opposite axle to make sure we don't have any repeat performances. And I've already removed it from the car, as you may be able to tell behind me. If you want to know the process for that, I did do a previous video where I pulled this same axle off to realign the CV joints, which is a thing on the NSX, and if you didn't know that, then something to check if you have little random vibrations that you can't track down. And I'll put a link to the video in one of these corners up here so you can go and check that out. That also includes, as I said, the process of removing the axle. In our case, it's already off the car and on the workbench. So let's go over there and we'll first discuss how to inspect your CV boots to see if they may be degraded to the point where it's a good idea to replace them. And then we'll actually go through the rebuild process. Let's get started. So with the axle off the car, we can look at it and honestly, you know, looking at it even from a foot away or 2 feet away, these boots don't look like they don't look bad at all, right? I mean, they're kind of consistent. There's no obvious cracks or tears. The coloration is what you would expect of a rubber boot. But if we look closer, things get notably less pretty. You can see here in the same place that it failed on the driver's side, this passenger side boot. Now granted, this is the, whoa, never mind focus. This is the outer end that we're looking at here. But the inner side, it is not really any better. It's not any worse either, but it's definitely not any better. Now I've skipped ahead a little bit to where all of this stuff has now been disassembled and crucially cleaned, because all of this stuff is caked in axle grease when you take it apart, and it is like playing with marbles and cold snot or something. It is really difficult to get everything kind of cleaned. Just go ahead and have a full roll of paper towels and ideally somebody to hand them to you while you're working on this. So we have the inner end cup here. Then we have these 3 bearings that go onto this little spider, as we'll call it. And then we have 2 snap rings or circlips, I'm not sure what those technically are called, that hold this thing in position on the inner end of the axle shaft. You can see the 2 grooves, one here and one here. When you go to take this apart, you'll take the small circlip off first, and you'll probably need a small gear puller or something to slide this off of the spline. And then to get the boot off, it really doesn't matter getting the boot off because you're not worried about if you tear it or not, but to get the new boot on, you're going to also want to remove this inner circlip as well, so you can smoothly slide the boot down to where it goes further down the shaft this way. Now, having everything apart and cleaned, I can kind of show you what this looks like. Now, caveat that when you take yours apart at home, if you have a stock, if you've never taken it apart before and it's as it came from the factory, it will not look like this. It'll mostly look like this, but these bearings will be different. I have a kit that was formerly sold, I don't know if it still is, by Driving Ambition, and it has some kind of a little bit beefier spherical bearings set up in here to handle, you know, the kind of horsepower they were putting through race cars. Now, I've never put that much horsepower through it, but at the time, it was actually cheaper to buy these than it was to buy the OEM parts to rebuild it when I did this the first time. So I was like, hey, whatever, it can't hurt. And if it makes a little extra noise, then I don't really care because I was going to put a loud exhaust in the car anyway. But how this all goes together is kind of interesting if you haven't seen it before. So these little spider, your bearings go onto these little spider legs, we'll call them. And then this whole assembly here slides down in this piece here. So that's what it's going to look like. I mean, if I center that, it will actually slide down. And then this is what gives you can kind of tell, because I can pull it up here and wiggle it around some. Hang on. So this is what gives you the The combined sliding play of this is what gives you your articulation for your axle, as the ability of these things to move around. So they kind of roll, you know, they're gonna slide, they need to slide back and forth, but they also need to be able to pivot so that the axle shaft can play as the suspension of the car goes up and down. But once you have things apart and clean, I mean, that's kind of what you're gonna want to check, is that your bearings, either factory or aftermarket, don't have slop in them, and that you know, all of your spiders and snap rings and everything are in good condition. So from here, the next thing we're going to do is put the new boot on, and then we'll go about kind of reassembling this piece by piece until we're ready to put this cup on, at which point we will fill this with grease that comes with, if you buy the kit from Honda, it comes in a bag, and it has a thing of grease in it. This is an old part number. I was actually asking this, so this is probably one that I got handed by someone, which is just sort of an old part run. I think the current part number is 42017-SL0-020 if you're looking to order one. And these sets are still, as far as I know, readily available, but you know how supply chains are right now. So that's what we're going to do next, and then I'll kind of show you that as we step through it. All right, so with our new boot in hand here, I'm going to put just a little dab of silicone around the inner edge here of the small end, just to ease passage onto the shaft. And then you just kind of shove it on there. So it'll kind of go over the top like this, and the new rubber is going to be pretty compliant. And you get down here to the end, and you want to make sure that it's kind of all the way. The shaft has a neck in it. Right here, it kind of necks down a little bit. Hang on, I'll get you a close-up. So there's a little indent right here. You can even tell where the banding is supposed to go. So you want to get it all the way slid down there, and then you want to go ahead and band the inner end. Now, the boot kits, they come with, if I can find it, where I put it, I don't know. Anyway, the boot kits come with banding, but I don't have the tool necessary to tighten that kind of band. So I found these that work really well, and that's what I'm going to use. So you slide them around here, and there we go. All right, and then once you're able to kind of get it situated there, give it a little tap with a hammer or a screwdriver, and then you've got a special tool that you have to use that will smush in the top of this thing. Now that has mushroomed up, and this should be pretty tight, and you can kind of check and see that it now no longer really readily slides along there. It kind of moves within its little groove, but that's about it. So this one's ready to go. I'm going to give another quick little tap here with the screwdriver just to make sure that end and all three of those teeth stay engaged, but otherwise we are there booted on the inner end, and that should stay put. Now it's time to put the rest of the shaft back together. Step one of putting the shaft back together is, of course, to put your safety goggles on, because we're dealing with a snap ring here. So the way I found to do this with this one in particular is get yourself a flat bladed screwdriver that has a little bit of you know, some knurling on it, and you can kind of jam that in the gap here to get it started, and then you can keep some pressure on it with your fingers, and that should get you the purchase to get your snap ring pliers in there and get it and kind of work it the rest of the way down. Now you got to get past this first shaft because this one doesn't go there, and again, this is just kind of a fiddly operation that you just kind of keep pushing it. And there. And we're good. All right, so next thing we're going to do is take some of our axle grease that we've gotten with our kit here, and we're going to kind of smear it around the splines without making too big of a mess, because you still got to be handling this thing a little bit more, so you don't want to just completely shmoo it at this point. But that will ease the installation, I think, of the spider. Now the spider is not directional, so you can't put this on there's not an inside or outside. But you do want to make sure, again, that you are aligning this thing 60 degrees offset from how they are on the other end. So in my case, I'm looking at the other end of this, I need to be about right here. There we go. I think that's probably about as close as we're going to get to 60 degrees off. And that should slide with some encouragement the rest of the way on there. Should slide with some encouragement the rest of the way on here. Okay, there we go. Then we got to do our last snap ring. Now this snap ring is nowhere near as cantankerous, so it should just kind of let you pop it on around here. And, well, I say that, and then it's going to be a pain. This one was harder to get off than the other one, but it's easier to get back on. There. It's in its groove, and in its groove. All right. Cool. Now is when we would kind of put our, you put your spiders, or put your bearings back on your spiders at this point. They are a pretty tight tolerance fit, so they don't move around too much. And then once those are on, now we need to schmoo the cup. All right, so it's now time to put our axle grease in our cup. Now it's worth noting that the inside joint and the outside joint call for different amounts of grease to be put in here. The little grease container that they sell with you, or they sell you in these kits from Honda, they come with 175 grams. Now the inner side calls for 130 grams. The outside joint calls for basically all of this. So you're going to use not quite the whole container on the inside, and then you're going to use one whole container on the outboard joint. So this being the inboard joint, though, we're going to kind of just schmoo the stuff in here and then go to town, right? So that's, you know, you're going to mostly fill it up, but not completely. Ew. This is why my best friend's mom used to take the ketchup bottle away from me all the time. All right, so that is all but a little bit of the grease in there. And so now we have the fun of joining these two things, hopefully not making a giant mess, and and then getting an axle strap on here. So I'm going to go ahead and do this the way that makes the most sense to me. So I'm actually going to pick the axle shaft up and kind of just dunk it in there. That seems the way that'll be least likely to cause shenanigans. All right. So all those guys should be in here. There we go. All right. Now I have it in there. Make sure that's going down in there. Yeah, nothing like it's coating everything. So obviously that'll get, stuff will get coated pretty well. I'm going to kind of work it in and out just a little bit, just to make sure some grease gets in the bearing joints and everything before we button it up. But otherwise, I think we're probably good to go. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we're going to wipe around the edges here just to make sure we're not getting any, don't have any overflow or spillage that could interfere with their ability to get a good seal on this. And then we will button the axle or button the boot around here. So there we go, and we're going to snap it around there. Flip it back down here so I can do the banding. And this, again, you're going to just kind of want to be tidy about making sure you clean up anything that has squeezed out when you've done this, because anything that's squeezed out when you've done this will invariably get flung around your engine bay. All right, so then we're going to repeat the banding process on this guy and move to the other end, and I'll show you what that looks like when we take it apart. All right, so as we prepare to take this other end apart, you definitely want to glove up when you go to take one of these things loose, because axle grease, as I have described in several previous occasions, is pretty gross. I'm going to pop the band. You're just going to come in here with some pliers, pop it up like that, or if you have the other style, you might have to do something a little bit different. And then really should just be able to kind of pry this thing open. Now, the outer ends are a little bit spring-loaded, so spare a thought for that. So on the outboard joints, it's a little bit more tricky because there is in here a circlip, so kind of an internal snap ring that you have to undo before this assembly will come out. There we go. A little bit of effort there, but now trying to watch what I grab since my hands are just covered in this axle grease now. Now you should be able to remove that, and then you got a couple of extra parts here because with this front you have the spring that's creating that tension and a little cap. But that's essentially what you end up with on this side. So you've got this cup, which is the same as the other cup except it has the spline on the other end, on the outside there. Then you have spring, circlip, and then all the rest of the parts are the same. So I don't feel the need to demonstrate that again. But now that you kind of know how to get all this stuff apart, or hopefully you can sort of ascertain how to get this stuff apart from my fumbling on camera here, I'm going to put you guys down so I can go ahead and knock the rest of the job out, and we'll come back up with a little bit of a wrap up. So now that I've gotten everything kind of cleaned off a little bit, I did want to show you where the groove is for that circlip on these are going to be on the outboard joints rather. It can be a little bit tricky, kind of you saw how I tackled it there, but I'm a visual learner, so anytime I can kind of see what I'm up against, which you won't be able to with a giant pile of grease in the way initially when you take yours apart, I think that hopefully this will help you kind of understand what it is that you're dealing with there. One other thing I did want to touch on before I reassemble were these bearings. Now these were aftermarket pieces sold by Driving Ambition sometime back in the mid-2010s, I'm guessing. And these have been in the car for 70 or 80,000 miles, I think, at this point. And I'm no machinist, but I don't see any obvious, I guess I see a little bit of like something in there, but I can't tell if that's a reflection or anything going on. But there's no signs of heat discoloration or any serious pitting that I can see. And the where they were attached to the spiders is kind of the same. This is the top edge that would slide on the cup. This is the outside edge that would also slide against the cup, and it looks fine. Hopefully this is at some point in time in focus for you guys. There's kind of the inside of it. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of look at those and be like, I'm going to put them back in. They don't look bad enough for me to be concerned about it. Certainly, I don't know what they looked like. It's been too long for me to remember what they looked like new, but they seem to be holding up, so back in they shall go. But I'm going to get on with the reassembly and I'll pick you up afterwards. So with new boots now on both ends of our drive shaft, all that's left to do is put the drive shaft back on the car. I have already started that process, and I believe I have kind of covered that in a previous video at some point in time, so I'm not going to rehash it here. Now the process for doing what we did is the same on the driver's axle and the passenger's axle once you have them off the car. And hopefully that was your takeaway, is that you now know how to inspect your CV boots and then also change them if you find them deficient. On the driver's side, the only thing that's a little bit different with removing the drive shaft is you may have to deal with some transmission fluid. But if you tilt the car enough, elevate that side of the car enough, then you might be able to get away without doing it. Or you could also, again, hopefully, you've inspected this and you're not doing this in an emergency in a hotel parking lot or something. You could time it to when you would do your regular transmission fluid change anyway, and that way kind of it all works out neatly and you're not worrying about topping fluid back off or anything like that. But that's where we're going to leave it for today. Again, I hope you found this video informative, if not entertaining, and that it maybe saves somebody out there a headache. If it saves anybody out there a headache, then my job here is done. So that's part of the aim. You know, give back a little bit here. I've gotten a lot of help from the NSX community, so it's the least I can do. But all right, with that though, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this or found it useful, please don't forget to subscribe. But until next time, I'm Richard. This is Lap of the World, and I will see you guys all in the next video, if not at the track.